ready, folks. We're getting ready to go 650 feet underground and go check out the salt mines. Come along.
If you guys have any loose fitting clothing, make sure you hold on to that. There's a bit of a draft coming up.
Okay.
Alright, you can probably already tell it's kind of dark in here. It's going to get a lot darker. We usually go down in the dark. Do you guys want light on or anything like that?
No.
No lights? Okay. A couple of things about the mine. It's been open since 1923, so almost 100 years of production of salt. The miners tell us that they can probably get another 1,500 years out of this one level we're at.
Wow.
So, not going to really run out of salt around here. Down there, the atmosphere is pretty favorable. It's about 68 degrees all year round, so usually in the summer it's nice and cool down there. People like to be down there. During the winter, it's cold, so 68 is pretty nice. It's also got a 47% humidity around there, and that's also pretty nice. The rooms are very large, the ceilings are pretty tall, and it's well lit, so.
Does the pressure change like you're going underwater or anything when you go down deep?
You probably think you're starting to.
I can feel it, yeah.
That's just a pressure change, so swallow, yawn, that usually helps. Same thing you do if you're in a plane or going in the mountains.
How fast are we going down?
About 7 miles per hour is how fast that top speed we're going.
Okay.
The ride only takes about 90 seconds. We're almost there.
Gives you a soft landing, huh?
Yep.
I figured.
All right. If you guys want to step off to the left here, just go to that white line. Wait right there. I'll be over here. Yes.
Well, here we are. 650 feet underground. It's a little dark. Look at that big old rock of salt. Some old rail cars to ride down in the mine. Oh, they need the safety third sticker. They need our safety third sticker. How'd you like to have to ride that down 600 feet underground every day? Little truck. It's like old Ford Courier.
Graffiti on the wall.
are basically 4 steps to mining.
That's pretty cool.
Which are
It's like a digger or something. Looks like a chainsaw.
is undercut. The Kerry Salt Company and its successors have used many
That's
undercutters
wild.
over the years.
The salt has
The undercut
torn it
is
up.
a chainsaw that cuts into the bottom of the mine face, which is the wall about to be mined. The blade cuts a gash 8 or 9 feet deep in the wall and about 6 inches high. This cut weakens the wall, making the blast more efficient and giving the salt a place to fall. A skilled miner can undercut a
Oh, that's what it does. It's an undercut on the wall. Check it out.
The undercutter also enables the miners to maintain a fairly level floor. The gash, which is called a curve, is cut relatively straight, but with each advancing curve comes a bump in the floor. You can see where each new wall is formed with every successive blast on the floor in this bay. The undercutter's blade is adjustable and is useful for cutting trenches into the floor. It carved out this hole in the maintenance shop to enable mechanics to work on the mining equipment. A companion task to the undercutting is the drilling. Large 8-foot drill bits are attached to a drill to bore holes into the mine face. A miner generally drills 26 holes into a 40-foot face, which takes 20 minutes. The mine has several types of drills in operation. Some drills at this mine actually date to the 1930s and have been so well maintained that they're still in use.
The old Voyager tractor.
Willie's job running the street was much easier than when they had to lay train and carry heavy sacks. But he could have retired a long time ago.
International Harvester.
The downside of working 650 feet underground is that you can miss sunlight.
When it's up there, you don't hardly ever see the sun. It's dark and you come to work with perfect dark and go home and go on. That's part of the work.
Robert and Lloyd work together. Robert is the undercutter, and Willie drills the holes for the explosives. As you can hear, salt is pretty loud work, so it's not surprising when it's time for lunch. They want to get away from the noise. This break we're away from the mine face.
Let's go check out the Mike Rowe mine car. Dirty jobs.
They can put their feet in the water in one of these old recliners, or sit around and shoot the breeze. There's a bomb.
Oh yeah, you get feeling big back.
Looks like something I built.
When the day gets over for the first shift, it's time for Bob Hutchinson, some powder man to join us.
You know, it's such a different world now. It's different.
That's Mike Rowe.
It's kind of crazy.
It is a different world. 150 miles of mined iron tunnels, walls and ceilings sparkling with salt crystals. Bob's job is to put explosives in those holes so we can create high pure salt for Willie Arthur's food up here these days.
The most fun part about my job is we have an eye. There's anything like a black. It's
Crazy.
And so the word goes, and miners say,
The plastic caps are typically unfused and they're not functions.
Something to look at, something to do, something to find.
First is
We're always mining, always moving forward. So there's always either a different formation in the salt or something different to look at all the time.
usually mine walls are blasted each day at 300
Lots of interesting stuff down here. And the temperature is awesome. It's like 68 degrees. That's cool.
Straight for a catch drag line. That would have been rough.
Look at all that. The salt really does some work on that. Hey, would you trust that brake cylinder? Hells no. It's awesome stuff. It's so dark down here.
Has been blasted off the base. It's crushed and then transported to the surface. This process
Here's a Dutes engine. Hey, I saw one of these on one of the rat rods at Rat City Ruckus. It wasn't that big though.
and they hand-loaded the cars, which were on track that had been laid all the way up to the base. It took
Pretty cool.
about an hour to load one 3.5-ton car. Then the car was hauled by and loaded to the skid or twice. Each individual car was turned which churned the salt into the skid.
Very cool.
All topside. Around 1940, the carry salt company wanted to response to the
On the LHD tire.
instead of having 3 rails to the blasted up, the joint
It's pretty big. Got a lot of solid, really solid.
as soon as the trolley was filled, it transported the salt to the track.
It's all salt. All salt stuff. It's crazy. Boring holes. It's dark. Can't see nothing over there, I know. There's a dozer. I think I'll be able to lighten it up a little bit while you guys are watching, but we'll see. Hope you're enjoying the salt mine so far. Not gonna give you too much information on salt. We just want to check out all the equipment and, you know, just check it all out. Let's see. That's what we were just looking at in there. It's that bad boy. The Joy Loader. So dark. Pretty huge down here. They got several miles of tunnels. I don't know what we'll see though. It's Sunday, folks. Like I said, tried to get down here on Friday, but they was busy. Today's the last day of the fair, so figured maybe everybody's over there. Have a good day down here in the salt mine. Here's another big old rock of salt. No, I don't want to lick it. It's huge though. Wow. Smooth from everybody touching it. This is just some of the lab stuff they got on display here. Searching for ancient life in the salt. Oh look, maybe you can pause it to read it. If you're watching on the big screen anyway. Hard-working guys right there. I think it's cool. I like it. There's still some other stuff we gotta go see, so we'll find out what that is here soon. Lots of tunnels chained off. I think now we're gonna go see Superman or something. Superman costume. And the storage stuff that they got down here. I don't know, maybe those are one of the tracks that we're gonna go down. So I got another ride after this. 1954 ore car. In the Strataca. This one's set up so you could take pictures in it. And here's a shot of it with use or in action. Totally cool. Bunch of ore cars.
Driving me nuts today. All right, over here to your left is our Salt Mine Express, and I'll show you where we pulled up the rails and ties for that ride. And over here to your right is our dark ride area. I just ask if you see the train or a dark ride not to shine your lights out towards them, because of course we don't need to be blinding anybody. From left to right here or north to south are what we call entries. That's entering into the mine face where the miners are working. What we're driving on is called a crosscut. Where the entries and crosscut meet form these pillars. Now in this area they are 40-foot square with 50-foot square rooms, and in the area we're going into they are 50-foot square pillars with 50-foot square rooms. Now the job of the pillar is to support the weight of this back or overburden. Now we borrowed a lot of terminology from coal mining because a lot of times their seams were so narrow that they were on their hands and knees. So where they were working was directly in front of their face. The roof was the back, the floor was the belly, and the walls were the ribs. Now we don't use belly and ribs very often, but we do use face and back. All right, here we have an interactive part of our tour. We're going to raise your hands up and pass that curtain back to the person behind you. And those of you in back, let me know when we're clear. That way I don't turn around and blind anybody.
Clear.
All right, our first stop. On with this, there we go. Our first stop is to our right, and this little string hanging down from the ceiling. This is what we call a sight bob. We've put the reflective tape on there to make it a little easier to see. I know it might be tempting to reach out and swat at them or pull at them, but please don't. We do consider these artifacts to the museum. Now what they would do with that sight bob, they'd put it in the middle of the mine face and they'd measure 25 feet from either side, and that's how they got their 50-foot room. Now just below the tape on that sight bob, there's a little loop. When there were enough of them in line, the foreman would put his light on that loop, shine it onto the next one, and the next one, and so on and so forth. That's how they kept their line of sight. So just using sight bobs, compasses, and measuring tape, they were able to keep everything square and straight down here. I think they did a pretty phenomenal job with that minimal technology. All right, so I told you the pillars in this area were 50 feet, right? That's not 50 feet, is it? That's actually 150 feet. That's because we're in the transition panel from the 1940s panel behind us to the 1950s panel in front of us. What these are, they're called stress attractors. They're attracting more of this weight from the back or overburden. Now 100 feet above us, we have what's called a pressure arch. Think about when you build a wall with blocks and you knock the bottom center out and the arch stays. It's that same principle. That's what's holding everything 100 feet up and above. And I'll tell you what's between us and the pressure arch here in just a few minutes. So then all of this weight is pushing down on this pillar. There's a mineral called anhydrite directly underneath here, so it's not going anywhere. Well, the floor then has nowhere else to go but to flow out into the already mined out space. And salt can do this because it's plastic and elastic. It's actually going to bend before it breaks. If you look over here to your right, you can see we have about a 6 to 8 inch crust here, and that's hollow underneath here. This is what we call a floor heave or a floor buckle. And yes, I'm parked right on that crack. This is a very stable floor heave. I'm going to show you a much more spectacular one towards the end of our trip. Here's the beginnings of those dynamite boxes that we were talking about. All right, over here to your right, this is what we call dump salt. There is nothing wrong with it. When they first started mining, farmers were our largest purchaser, and they would buy big blocks of salt for their livestock. So the miners would take these big chunks of salt, lay them out, farmers would come through and pick out what they wanted. However, if they saw anything with that red or muddy, dark, dirty salt, they wouldn't buy it. That red is potassium, and they thought it would be too bitter for their cattle. So rather than wasting their time and resources in getting these pieces topside that they knew they couldn't sell, they just dumped them off into these empty rooms. Now in today's mine, you're not going to see anything like this. Everything is ground up, underground, and sent topside. The majority of our salt is actually used for road salt. All right, over here to our left, this is a powder magazine. The red powder car would come right up here, drop the dynamite off. This is the closest to the face it could be stored and still be safe. Here we have a couple guys here where OCD had everything stacked up nice and neat. This dude here, he could care less. He just threw them over his shoulder. However, he was pretty ingenious. He took the wooden dynamite boxes, made himself a chair and some shelving. That way he could sit while he was prepping his dynamite. Kind of work smarter, not harder type of thing. Also, as we're driving by here, you're going to notice what pristine condition these boxes are in. They look like they just came down yesterday, when in fact, they've been down here over 60 years. Wow. There's no wind or rain, no varmints or critters, so as long as we stay off of them, they're going to look just like they do right now. All right, so have any of you ridden the train yet?
No.
No, okay. Well, this right here is what we call a roof fall. The pieces on the floor used to be the roof. However, this particular roof fall starts in this room up here, goes 500 feet that direction, and 100 feet deep. Now, what happened here, remember I mentioned the pressure arch. Well, between us and the pressure arch, there are naturally occurring self-supporting beams of salt. There's one at 6 feet, 9 feet, 13 feet, and 17 feet. Now what happened here, if you follow my laser here, we're driving under this nice 9-foot beam, but if you go up, they mined up and into that 9-foot beam. But they didn't go all the way up to the 13-foot, so it caused it to weaken and sag. There again lies the elasticity of salt. The minute they see a sag like this, they move out of the area. Up to that 17-foot beam, because there's never been a failure at that level. That is the most substantial beam we have in this mine. In the 1950s, the rail bed was the lifeblood of the mine. It was the only way they were able to move men, salt, and equipment. We're coming up on our first set of railroad tracks. This one, however, is an anomaly. Normally, you're not going to see any ties, let alone any rails. They reused and recycled everything. Each one of these ties can be used at least 4 times. They bring them down new, drive in the spike, and when they open a new face, they pick everything up, rotate those ties a quarter turn, and so on and so forth. This is actually where we pulled up the rails and ties for our Salt Mine Express. So you will be riding on the rails and ties that were used by the miners 60 years ago.
Wow, cool.
Now the rail also would have been very well lit. If you look directly above us here, you can see the power lines and the old knob and tube lighting here. Because of course you want to see what's on that rail bed as you're driving along. And wherever there's one rail bed, there's always going to be a second bypass track. And that's what we're coming up on now. And this is what you're normally going to see. It's picked completely clean. Except we have our one little seed tie there. Myron says he comes out and waters it every day, but it just doesn't seem to grow anything. Here's some more of that dump salt. Okay, now over here to your right, we have a nice 50-foot room, 50-foot pillar. But if you follow my laser, and bear with me, I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. Look right over here to your left. Notice how muddy and red this salt is. This is what we call a stub wall. This is 60 feet as opposed to 50 feet. Now they blasted here about 4 times, but they never got any good clean salt that they knew they could sell. So again, rather than wasting resources, they moved out of the area. Now if you shine your lights as you're driving by here, you can see where those pillars should have lined up. Of course, no microwaves back then, so they put it on the motor or in front of their light, and by the time they were ready to eat, it was hot and ready for them to eat lunch. I also tend to think there's some miners' wives out there wondering what the heck happened to my canning jars. Here we have some electrical wire, and if you look right in this hole here, you can see there's some Hershey's wrappers. Hershey's has not changed their packaging in over 60 years. So I guess the adage if it ain't broke, don't fix it is actually true. right, this is our most spectacular crystal pod. We're actually really lucky it's still here because one more blast and this would have been gone. The miners nicknamed this the submarine. You can kind of see the conning tower here and the body of the sub here. But if you look around, you can see how muddy and dark and dirty this salt is. It took them 3 months to determine not to continue in this direction. If you look right up here in this corner, you can see they were here March, April, and May of 1958. This is what we call tagging. The first of every month, the mine foreman would come out and tag the face of the mine to determine how long it was taking to go through an area. In that 3-month period, they kept coming back here. They even did some mucking and or cleaning up. And then after 3 months, they finally decided that that little bit of crystal was not worth all of this other muddy, dark, dirty salt that they knew they could not sell. Now, great fact about this room, if you were to talk to miners from the 1950s or even some of them today and told them that you were in the submarine room, they'd know exactly what you were talking about and where you were at. So the crystal corner, the submarine, and all crystal salt is formed by water. Now the geologic term is called a fluid intrusion. The miners, however, just call it a pipe. And if you follow my laser up here, you can see there's where your water came in, there's your brine pool, silt and mud settles down to the bottom, and over time it dries out and grows brittle and will fall out. So anytime that you see silt and mud on the floor, if you look directly above it, more than likely you're going to find a pipe. Now this is also the closest to the active mine face that you are ever going to get. 300 to 500 yards on the other side of this wall here is where the miners are working today. Even if they were working, we probably would not hear them unless they were right on top of us or if they were blasting. And unfortunately, they've not been blasting in the afternoons anymore, so we don't get to hear it. It's pretty cool when it happens. So right now what we're going to do, I'm going to have you turn your lights off. And we're going to experience over here to your left. No, it's not a driller gone wild or anything here. These are actually test holes. Each hole goes in about 6 to 8 inches, and they take the fines out of each hole, put them in their own separate bag, and they send them topside to test for purity. Now you can see how your light is reflecting off of the crystal right in through here, but if you look along the bottom here, you can see how milky and cloudy this is. This is actually calcium. So remember when we went around the pillar and into the submarine room and the pipe room, we actually went uphill? Those areas were mined after this because what they were doing was actually raising that floor in order to get away from that calcium deposit. and also over here to your left, what's so interesting about a wall, they say? How about the fact that according to the mine map, that wall was not there? Myron, our mine specialist, who worked for the mine for 38 years, was laying out this route, and we were going to make a left-hand turn and go right through there. Well, whoops, there's no there to go through. Well, he went around to the other side, and he saw how muddy and dark that salt was, so he knows why they didn't blast. What he doesn't know is why they didn't put it on their maps, because they're very meticulous as far as their maps go. Every nook and cranny down here is marked. All right, over here to your right is another powder magazine, one of our largest actually. Only imagine about 300 more boxes in here. This is actually where they pulled the boxes for that safari hike. Here we have some blasting wire. It was one-time use only. Once they pulled the fuse, the connection was damaged, could not be used again. Now, did you guys get a chance to watch the mining videos? Mm-hmm. So that second video, the blasting video, you know, the blast basically starts at the bottom and works its way out and up. Now, to the naked eye, it may look like 1 second, when in actuality, it is milliseconds. And if you look on the floor to your right here, you can see we have MS-25, MS-50, and 1. Each stick of dynamite had to be in a specific hole in order to get that time-efficient blast. So when I said that the powder man was prepping his dynamite, not only was he putting in the blasting caps, but he was getting those tabs ready as well. Now, when you guys were in school, were any of you ever told to go to the end of the line? I actually have people admitting it today. Well, you are now at the end of the line. The end of the main rail line, that is. Over here to your left is the main rail bed. You can still see some ballast and ties here. But over here to your right is what we're really interested in. This is what we call snap track. This was a temporary track that they could lay down. There's a knob on the side that tightens down. What they would do is they'd bring the miners down in the morning on the skip, load them up onto the man trip, which is that second piece of equipment that you saw in our gallery. Take the miners back out to the face. They would back the man trip up in here on this snap track, unhook it from the main rail. That way they're not hauling around an empty car all day. At the end of the day, they come back in, hook the man trip back up, take the miners back to the skip, and get them back to the surface. You would see. This is what they call a shot room or a muck pile. And this is what it looks like the morning after a blast. On today's market, this is approximately $12,000, and they'll never come back to get it. A couple of reasons. One, when they leave an area, they don't come back. Two, it wouldn't be cost effective, because they'd have to bring the large equipment, the lights, and the conveyor belt, which in the end would probably cost more than this was actually worth. Now, they would sometimes leave these ready reserve rooms thinking they were going to come back, or if the undercutter, driller, and powder man were working ahead, if they were moving equipment or they had an equipment failure, this would actually give the muckers something to do. Now, what's better than a single shot?
A triple.
A double shot. That's what we're coming up on here. So again, between these three rooms, we're looking at approximately $36,000 worth of salt that they'll never come back to get. Now, had they continued mining, they'd have gone east here for the entry, north for the crosscut. Now, part of the reason we believe they did not continue in this direction is they didn't have the mineral rights in order to do so. They probably blasted here, and when they looked at their maps, they said, hey, wait a minute, we can't be here. So they had to back out of the area because, in essence, they were trespassing. We have to call about halfway through our trip, make sure we're running on time, and I'm perfect, actually. cross cut would have come right about through there. Alright, so having watched those videos, you know there are basically 4 steps to the mining process. The first being the undercut. And the reason they undercut is in order to weaken the wall. Because if you were to just drill a hole, put some dynamite in there and blow it up, all you're going to get is a bigger hole. So by undercutting, that blade goes in about 8 to 10 feet. We've got it from corner to corner, and it weakens that wall and gives the salt a place to fall. Now when you use a chainsaw on wood, what do you get?
Marks?
Sawdust. Roof, and noticed how pockmarked it's been. As we make this corner, I want you guys to start looking up again. Separate that salt from that natural mud layer above it. Now we don't know a whole lot about him other than 1, he's the best driller they've ever had and they still try to emulate him today. And 2, he was an aide to General Patton during World War II. So you know his work ethic had to be pretty darn high in order to work for General Patton. So every time that they would do a new entry and a new crosscut, that would open up a new face. Every time they open a new face, they have to move all of their equipment. Rails, ties, and power lines. But somehow or other, they forgot these. These are insulators, and there's always 5 of them. The 3 in the front are the 480 volt 3-phase power system for the large equipment. Then we have the 230 volt for the smaller equipment and the lights. Normally, all you would see is a 2x, or as we've been driving through, if you've seen the bolts hanging down, that's where the insulators would have been installed. Our maintenance staff found another complete intact set a couple of years ago and brought it out here for us. And that's another reason why we believe they didn't have the mineral rights, because they moved out of this area rather quickly and left some things behind. So had you been in this area in the 1940s, 50s, and the early 60s, you probably came down here with your school group. They had put you on the skip, lowered you down, loaded you up onto the man trip that the miners used. Engineer would have brought you right out here. You can see how the walls are painted white. The light reflects off of that white paint, so he knows this is where he's going to drop you off at. Miners would have picked you up right here, taken you out to the mine face, talked to you about mining, showed you what they did, how it was done. However, every time that skip is used for something other than the production of salt, it halts that production. So every time you bring a group down or take a group up, you're not making any money. I also tend to think the miners like talking to the kids as much as the kids like talking to the miners, so I don't think a whole lot of work was getting done in the first place. They stopped that practice in 1961 and until we opened the museum in 2007. My mom actually can remember coming down here when she was in school and visiting the mine. Now, National Geographic actually did come down here. They had their own personal tour. They even did some photographing. If you look along the pillar over here, you can see some of their film paper. They just kind of tossed it off to the side, because what comes in the mine stays in the mine, except for our guests, of course. All right. You guys don't need to turn your lights off. Just put them down in your lap. I'm going to show you something really cool. Kind of looks like kryptonite. Well, we are Smallville once a year anyway. All right, you can bring your lights back up. And that corner is really cool, but that is not what we're interested in. What we are interested in is right down here. Remember earlier I mentioned that anhydrite is what's directly underneath us. Normally it's a dull gray color, but somehow we've gotten an outcropping on this pillar, and when it hit the air it actually oxidized and turned that red color. Now the miners would have been very upset had they come across this, because anhydrite is a very hard mineral. It's basically gypsum without the water in it. So it would have damaged the undercutter blades and the drill bits. Also, as we're driving by here, you can see there's a pack of Camel, Tarrington, and Kent. There's even a cigarette butt right down there. They were able to smoke down here. Obviously not around the dynamite, but they were able to smoke. I talked about pipes, and normally they're vertical, but somehow or other this one on our left has gotten diverted, and we now have a horizontal pipe. Again, it amazes me what Mother Nature can do, because you think water's flowing down and then all of a sudden it starts going horizontally. This is one of the few horizontal pipes we actually can see down here. So, has anyone noticed a change in the air?
Feels good to me.
What's the difference? It's a little bit cooler. It's moving a little bit more. We just turned into the fresh air side of the East Main. There are 4 mains, north, south, east, and west, and they all come out from the mine shaft. This is the freshest air that's just come down from the surface. It's not had a chance to acclimate with the rest of the mine. Now, in mine, these tunnels going in opposite directions, and remember earlier I mentioned the sight bobs, compasses, and measuring tape, that minimal technology. Here we have a sight bob right here. Myron calls this corner Monuments Precision Mining. It's just using that simple technology, they were able to make that corner basically going at it blind. This arch right here is where they would have met. This team got here February 1st of 1955, and they were the ones to have blasted through. Again, looking on either side here, you can see that precision and how close they really were. This team was here a little bit earlier, October 1st of 1954. But the date we're really interested in is right up here. It's a little bit light. This is June 1st of 1954, and this is written in carbon. When they first started mining, they were using carbide lamps, which is an open flame. So the foreman would have to take his hard hat off and use that flame to tag the face of the mine. So sometime between June 1st and July 1st of 1954, they transitioned from the carbide lamps to battery-operated lights and had to start using paint to tag the face of the mine. This is the latest date that we have seen written in carbon. We have another one right up here. You can still see it's the same handwriting. It's a little bit darker. But then over here he kind of had an argument. Wasn't sure if it was July, August, no, then decided it was July again. Although I don't know who he would have been arguing with. All right, one more time, guys. We're going to raise your hands up and pass that curtain back. I don't need to know when we're clear. We just turned into the exhaust side of the East Main, and this is where the rail would have been. In case of an electrical fire or anything like that, any smoke or fumes would have been exhausted off here to your right. There is a chain link fence down here. Go about 3/4 of a mile that direction. That'll take you to the skip that the miners are still using today. It has been in operation since 1923. Over here to your left would have taken you out to the mine face. And remember earlier, I told you that the rail would have been very well lit. You can see the lamp posts here, and each one is dated. This one is April of 1955. here we are at our souvenir salt pile. I do have some rules though. Please do not go past this pillar right here or this pillar behind us. Stay on the right-hand side. Please do not climb on the salt pile because it's slick and I don't need anybody getting hurt. And you can pick a piece of salt up to the size of your hard hat. Just remember, you have to carry it. You may now exit to your right. And once you have your salt, guys, I do have bags for you. So where's everyone from?
Vegas.
Vegas, all right.
North Carolina.
All right.
Northwest Kansas.
Okay. All right. Oh, sorry. You're fine. I try not to blind people, but obviously don't carry that by the handles. Everyone having a good time so far?
I'm curious, they build houses on top
I
of
like
this
this one.
Yes.
I'm gonna take that one.
There's houses actually built on top of this mine.
Well, the houses were probably there before the
Already
mine was.
before.
Yeah. See, this is totally different than coal mining and stuff like that, because this is salt. His assistant were always supposed to stay together. His assistant wandered off. They didn't realize it until the blast went off. A piece of salt came out, hit him in the head, and he was killed. The second was in 1953, and it was a rail accident. It was before they started using the two-rail system. The driver of the battery-operated locomotive that you saw just as you entered the gallery thought he could make a quick run without calling topside. He came around the pillar, collided with the main rail, his battery shifted and he was crushed, and he died as a result of those injuries. So in 96 years, only 2 deaths that were mining related, and they were both human error. I think that's a pretty good safety record. All right, over here to your left is a loading station. This is one of the first in the 1950s panel. At this time, they were no longer loading the rail cars at the mine face. They were using joy loaders and shuttle cars. So the joy loader would fill the shuttle car. That shuttle car would come right up this ramp, made with that salt dust that we talked about. It had a conveyor belt, which would dump the salt into a flight conveyor, which would then dump it into the rail car, which would then take it out to the skip. After that accident in 1953, they started using the two-rail system. So here's that second bypass track. Now this would have been a very busy place, a lot of men working. So you needed a break room of sorts. And whenever you have a break room, you end up with an awful lot of trash. And this is one of our larger trash piles. There's a banana peel right there. There's a sandwich here and here. And there's a glass Welch's grape juice bottle right over here. But those things are really cool, but what we're really interested in is this little pamphlet back here. This was the community chest. It was a 12-in-1 campaign, basically the precursor to the United Way. They helped the American Heart Association, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, among others. But the one we're interested in is called the Penny Ice Fund. At this time, people were still using ice boxes as opposed to refrigerators. So they needed a block of ice in the bottom of that in order to keep their food cold. Well, there were people in the area who could not afford that ice. So the Penny Ice Fund helped the underprivileged of Reno County purchase the ice for their ice boxes. Now, it didn't hurt that Emerson Carey, the owner of the salt mine, also had the only ice plant in town for a while. So kind of got that back to full. Here we have a manual greaser. Now, does anyone care to guess what direction we are headed?
West.
You got a 1 in 4 shot, guys.
West.
Nope. We are going north. Was that a yes or did you know?
I had no idea.
Okay. As you can tell, it is very easy to get disoriented down here. So every now and then, the miners would actually go through and they would paint a compass rose. And as you can see, we were going north. And that one's pretty rare because it's intact. Now, they love to tell this story. There was a gentleman down here who was directionally challenged. So much so that he had to have arrows painted on rocks in order for him to get where he needed to be. Well, one day, men being boys, they decided they were going to move those rocks around, and he was tootling around in a circle for a little over an hour before they decided to take pity on him and move the rocks back to where they needed to be so he could get where he needed to be. What's sad is I probably would have been one of those moving the rocks. Now, as we're driving through here, I want you guys to start looking up at the tops of the pillars and the roof of the mine. Notice how dark it's getting. That is not mud. It's actually soot. They had a fire down here, late 40s, early 1950s. One night they'd gone home and everything was fine. They come back the next work day and they had no power. Well, they went around to investigate. And over here to your left, there had been an oil-based transformer. It had somehow caught a spark and caught fire. Now, of course, salt doesn't burn. So by the time the oil burned out, the wood burned down, the fire burned itself out, and everything exhausted out of the mine. But I want you guys to take a nice, deep breath. You can still smell that soot and oil. That's been 70 years ago, guys. Now, this is also a great PSA. When firefighters tell you to stay low during a fire, there's your reason why. Now, remember earlier I showed you that teeny tiny floor heave, and I promised you a much more spectacular one? Take a look to your left. This is the granddaddy of them all. Up until about 6 years ago, the museum staff would come out here, walk out there, hold their hands up, and take a picture like they're holding up the roof of the mine. But as you can see, it's cracking, and if you listen, you can hear my voice is echoing back. That's hollow underneath there. This is a 9-foot ceiling that looks to be about 2 feet from the ceiling, so there'd be about a 7-foot fall in a very abrasive material. What happens when salt gets in a wound? Yeah, needless to say, we don't go out there. One of two things is going to happen here. It's going to continue to grow, and it'll hit the roof, and then it will collapse, or it's going to collapse under its own weight. And then I won't have this wonderful floor heave to show anymore. Also, as we're driving by here, if you shine your lights down here, you can see where the pillar is, or well, the salt is pulling away from the pillar and how hollow it is. And we're just about back to the beginning. Doesn't seem like we've been gone for an hour, does it? When I talked about pipes being vertical and horizontal, I'm going to give you guys a chance now to actually look up and into a pipe. Just make sure you hold on to your hard hats. You see how it forms those cubes, kind of looks like ice cubes. Sometimes I wish we could get in there and clean that out, but I know it would destroy it. So, all right, one more time, guys. We're going to raise your hands up, pass that curtain back. I want to thank you folks for joining us today. If you couldn't tell, this is my favorite tour to give. And if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be able to go out there. So I thank you for deciding to spend a little bit of your time with us today. What we're going to do is we're going to come around that pillar right where we started, and I will collect your flashlights. I'll show you where you can store your salt. That way you don't have to carry it throughout the rest of your tour, and we'll get you on the rest of your rides. And once again, I thank you folks for joining us today. You may now exit the tram.
On a wall that was used to direct airflow. This bulkhead is made of 1.5-inch thick tongue and groove planks supported by 6-inch by 6-inch timbers and sealed with black tar paper on the backside to keep air from that part of the mine from coming into this side. It was slowly being crushed by the roof, but as you can see, it finally came down. On the platform are a couple of two-thumbed gloves. In the 1940s, when this area was being mined, everyone conserved materials for the war effort. The miners would wear the gloves until they wore out the palms. Then they would wear them on the opposite hands, using the second set of thumbs until they wore out the backs of the gloves. Now, stories have been told that Mr. Carey, the owner of the Carey Salt Mine, was always after the miners to pick up their trash and not contaminate the salt. Well, apparently a miner rolled up these gloves and stuffed them in a blasting hole, because that's where we found them 60 years later when we opened this part of the museum. Now, if you look closely at the salt wall to the right, it appears there's another glove stuffed in a blasting hole. As you look to your left, you'll see a rare sight, what the miners call a roof fall. The pieces on the floor used to be the roof, but over a number of years, the salt started sagging away from the compacted mud layer above it and eventually fell. Now, even though only a few rooms ever develop a roof sag, everywhere in the mine that people will walk, drive, or ride, we monitor the roof, and sags are removed when necessary. Can you imagine how it must have sounded when this roof fell?
Right.
From 1923 to 1983, the miners used a rail system to transport salt from the mine face to the salt skip, where it was hoisted topside. Then, in 1983, they switched to a conveyor belt system. On the left is a car that was used to haul salt, and railroad tracks that were abandoned when mining left this area in the 1950s. The miners would use the same rails and ties over and over, since bringing more down the skip was both time-consuming and costly. Our train crew ripped up and hauled back abandoned rails and ties from the mine that were used for our train track. Almost 5,000 feet of rail for the track you're riding on. At the next curve, we'll pass by other original cars used with the rail system, including a hand-wheel-operated rail-bending car. lit area, you'll see that this is even true of mining trash. Now we know this area was mined in the 1940s and used as a break area in the 1950s. And we found many name brand products in this trash pile from that time period, and some of which are still around today. There are a couple of things that we noticed here. One, there's a calendar from 1953 on the floor by the rocks on the left. And two, when we found it over by the pillar, the great trash can, well, it was empty. We consider all these items to be artifacts, which only proves one person's trash is another's treasure.
Wait, I gotta go.
In case you were wondering, trash isn't the only thing miners left underground. And apparently this area was used as a restroom. Oh, no fancy porta pots here. And they weren't very careful with the toilet paper either. And this is one reason we say, don't lick the salt.
Right.
As we round the curve up ahead, two spotlights will come on. The first on the left will highlight a stack of empty cardboard dynamite boxes. Then on the right, you'll see a pillar that is scaling or spalling. This means that the salt is breaking away from the wall. And like roof sags and floor heaves, this is a natural occurrence in a salt mine. And as your ride continues, keep in mind, we've tried to leave the mine just as it was years ago. Now, when we get to the station, please remain seated when we stop and do not get off the train until instructed to do so.
Finger of God. The old computer. All right, we're back in here. Back in the storage place. There's Dorothy from Twister. That's pretty cool. Pre-digital world video editor. God, if I had to do my YouTube videos like that, you'd be waiting for a long time for a YouTube video. It's kind of cool. Everything stays preserved down here. Pretty awesome.
Strange thing.
All the movie cases, reels. Too cool.
You are going to be out for an hour on the shuttle. Start up facilities out on shuttle. So if you think you're going to need
Yeah, my B suit.
next hour, now's the time to go.
Oh no, Matrix. I'm sorry, I can't read.
Not yet.
So dude for Matrix.
Just wait to cheer something. Yeah, you sent me that. Yep.
Superman. Let's see, which one was this one from? This one was worn on Lois and Clark TV show. You know, Hutchinson, Kansas is Smallville in real life. There's Arnold. And the Batman. Let's see, the Batman was from which one? 1997. Ricky Bobby. That was I think Ricky Bobby's wife. Jacket that she had on. Yeah, Mrs. Ricky Bobby. Who knows? They could be look-alike stuff, but still pretty cool. All the stuff down here in the salt mine, folks. Pretty awesome. That's Matt Damon's outfit. All the movies stored in here. There's City Slickers 2. Hey, I see City Slickers 2. Lighting's horrible. I don't know if you could read any of that stuff. Time to buy a souvenir.
But it gives you an idea of the size of them. I mentioned that Stub Wall was collapsing from pressure and floor up. If you look at these pillars on the right-hand side, you'll notice that around the pillars, the floor is heaving. And that's what we call the salt. It's a very hard layer of it. And it's to just flow up next to the pillar instead of pushing down on it. And it's an ongoing process. It continues even today. On the train ride and the shuttle ride, you saw rooms where the roof had fallen. Here's a roof fall of fairly massive proportions. You can tell how thick the salt was that fell by the gentleman standing in the crevice. But notice the fellow on top of the rock salt. He's got his right arm on a piece that has yet to fall. And it's attached at the left and it's attached at the right. Well, even though salt is a crystal, It has an elastic property that allows it to bend before it breaks. So that bow that you see is evidence of that elastic property. On the left of the screen there, you see that wooden bar. That's called a scaling bar. It has a sharp, flat tip on one end of it, much like a chisel. And when they shot the face of the mine, if there were pieces of salt that still clung to the roof line that did not come down with the explosion, they would take that scaling bar and scale the roof to knock the salt down before it fell down. So when you're in the mine, whenever you look up, if you see a white scratchy mark on the roof of the mine, that's evidence of a miner using a scaling bar to knock salt down before it fell down. And they did that for a variety of reasons. They, of course, it was somewhat valuable. They wanted to get it in that day's production. They wanted to keep their roof line as true as possible. And they certainly didn't want that salt to fall and hit someone in the head later. If you can see it, in this area there was a lot of evidence of scaling, and in some areas of the mine there's hardly any scaling needed at all. It could have been a difference in mineral content, or it could have been that the driller that day just was not as accurate as he could have been. You might have heard the old expression that what goes down in the mine stays in the mine. Well, here's a prime example of that. And first and foremost, the reason that things stay down in the mine is that this little truck, and even those larger pieces of mining equipment that you saw on display, everything came down that same 4-foot by 5-foot skip that the miners rode down in. It was the only entrance into the mine. So they had to cut this machinery into pieces that would fit inside that shaft, bring it down, and then reassemble it for use in the mine. So when it was worn out or replaced or simply no longer needed, they didn't bother cutting it back apart, be sent topside in pieces just to be sold for scrap. So they just left it behind. They were always moving forward, exploring new territory. It didn't bother them at all to just leave something where it spent its last day. Does anyone want to venture a guess as to the make and model of that vehicle? That at one time was a 1932 Chevrolet pickup.
Chevy.
But even though it was a Chevrolet and has 4 different varieties of wheels on it, they had those so they didn't take up space on the hoist, bringing down something they didn't need. The steering wheel and the steering column were rescued from an older Dodge vehicle. But you'll notice most importantly that up front the gasoline engine was left topside and it was retrofitted with that electric motor we used in the mine. And that little truck had its own 300-foot extension cord that allowed it to tool around these pillars and take materials and supplies to the miners. And as they moved deeper into the mine, they would move the power source, so the truck was always available. The majority of vehicles in the mine are electric, either AC or DC. If that vehicle still requires an internal combustion engine, that engine has been modified to run on a fuel called biodiesel. B100 is the trade name. It's a synthetic fuel made out of soy, but it will fire in an internal combustion engine. However, the exhaust burns clean. There's no carbon monoxide in that exhaust. And that is why no gasoline engines are used. There is no place for that carbon monoxide to escape. Back in the 1950s, the federal government realized that they had a rather new and increasing problem on their hands, what with the onset of the nuclear age. The problem was what to do with the radioactive waste that was being generated by all the nuclear fission. In 1958, the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, contacted this mine with a request to do a 2-year study to determine if a mined-out salt mine would be a suitable disposal place for radioactive waste. They had in mind to bore holes into the salt floor, put the waste material into containers and lower those containers into those holes, and then recover them with rock salt. They thought that that would permanently seal the waste and would also help dissipate heat, which was still being generated by it. Piece to take home with you, you're more than welcome. There's also some bags on that wire spool. If you want to take your bag from area from Terre Haute, Indiana. His name was Ben Blanchard. He was a banker and land speculator, and he staked a claim and started the little town of South Hutchinson. It's a separate, smaller municipality on the other side of that river from Hutchinson. And in 1887, Mr. Blanchard was attempting to drill for oil on one of his properties, and prior to striking oil, he hit this bed of rock salt. And that single discovery started the whole salt boom in and around Hutchinson, Kansas. Within a year's time, there was no less than 10 competing companies attempting to produce salt, all of course by using what we refer to as the solution mining process. Rather than bringing men and machines underground, as Mr. Carey did here in the solution mining process, they bore wells into this deposit. They flush those wells with water and leave that water underground for sometimes as long as 2 years. That salty water becomes brine. They pump the brine topside. They force evaporate the water off of that solution, and that leaves a pretty pure grade of salt. That's how your table salt is still produced, by solution mining. You're going to see some yellow bread turtles over on your right-hand side. That's actually a room between 4 pillars that we call our event center. We actually have a concrete floor in there, so dinner and drinks are not a problem. But we have many corporate events. We have Boy Scout and Girl Scout jamborees. We've actually had some weddings down here before, but you'll notice this signboard that's been partially erased because just 2 weeks ago, 3 actually, on August 17th, we had our interactive dinner theater. We do that 3 times a year, April, August, and December. It's part of our Murder in the Mine mystery series. And by interacting, you, as one of the dinner guests, might be asked to read one of the parts on the script, and you would therefore become a suspect in that investigation. But it's always very comically done, but the players that come here from Chicago will drop little hints and little clues as to who or why that crime was committed, but they never divulge who the perpetrator was. At the end of the dinner, we poll all the dinner guests, and everyone jots down on a card they've been given who they suspect. If they're correct in their guess, their name goes into a hat, a winner gets drawn from that group, and that person goes home with a very nice prize. It's a fun evening, but it does sell out, so if you think you'd ever like to be a part of that, I would highly recommend a reservation, either online or by contacting our topside office. Well, folks, we're going to come to a complete stop as you exit on your left. It's much safer for you that way, and thank you for riding with me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the trip down the mine. It was a new experience for me. It's kind of fun. Your ears are still kind of popping. I'm coming up 650 feet. But we're going to go check out their little train right over here, and then we're going to get out of here. Off to the next adventure before I go home. This is the last spot on the mine tour that I'm going to look at today. Hey, it's General Electric. Down here at the Strataca. Ore dump, or something like that. And Hutchinson Police across the street. Well, Highway Patrol anyway. Pretty awesome out here, folks. I really like Kansas. Yes, indeed. Here we go. Join us on our next adventure with the rotter files, whether it be cars, animals, salt mines, driving, whatever. Can you see the grain elevator way down over there? I've drove by it like 50 times already since I've been here. Peace.